Hey, good morning, everybody. It's just me today, Troy. Steve is off being a pilot, doing his Maverick thing, flying somewhere. So you're stuck with me all by myself today, and we're going to be covering why composting worms are not good in garden soils. First up, a few reminders here. If you haven't gotten signed up for the NC State Vermiculture Conference, I would recommend everybody who's into worm composting on a medium to large scale do that. If you haven't gone before, it's a really cool experience. It takes place this year, October 22nd and 23rd. It's over a weekend. And if you sign up by September 22nd, you receive $50 off the price. And then there's also a price. So I believe it's $250 up until September 22nd, and then it's $300 after that. So it's also available online for the first time this year, which is pretty exciting. In the past, it's only been available in person. So if you're far away and can't travel, especially with airport air prices, air tickets these days, it's a bit ridiculous. So you can always sign up for the online streaming conference. Also, the Urban Worm Bank Eco is available, made from recycled plastic bottles. We didn't talk about it as much in July. July was plastic-free July, so a little late for that. But anyway, check out that Urban Worm Bag Eco. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube if y'all are YouTubers. And if you've been tuning in for the past few weeks, I had mentioned possibly getting a Jamaica assignment soon to go teach vermicompost. So I actually did get the assignment, yes. I'm going to be going in September and going for a couple weeks to teach vermicomposting and touch on soil biology and not sure what else. I'm going to talk to them tomorrow, so I'll find out more then. But yeah, it's part of the Farmer to Farmer program, which is part of Partners of the Americas, and the local host is Food for the Poor Jamaica. So I'm excited to be able to go and help some people out there. All right, I'm going to get right into the program here. So if you all, I just wanted to mention, once I get into the slideshow here, I don't see the regular screen, so I'm not going to be able to see your questions since I'm by myself until after I get off of the presentation here. So if you type something, I'm not going to be able to see it right away and answer, but we'll get right into the presentation here. So composting worms are different from other types of earthworms. And today I want to set straight any confusion about adding composting worms to your soils or gardens. So I've especially seen lately on different Facebook groups and things like that, people asking about this, and there are different products on the market that regard this exact topic. So that's why I wanted to touch on this. I think it's an important topic. So we're going to get right into it. So what we're going to talk about today is first the three ecological groups of worms and how they're separated by where they live within the soil. And then we're going to get into specifically epigeic worms, which are composting worms, different species of composting worms. And then we'll talk on why they are good composters, what makes them good at composting, why we use them for composting, and then why they are bad soil dwellers. And then we'll talk about a few of the gray areas where it's iffy, and then we can get into some Q&As. So first up here, the three ecological groups of earthworms. So most people assume that all earthworms make their home underground, which isn't necessarily so. We have anisic worms, which burrow deep and vertically. So they're going to go up and down throughout the soil profile, and they're going to eat soil and leaf litter. They're larger in size. So the night crawler, like an American night crawler, not European or African night crawler, but the regular Lumbricus terrestris, that's a good example. That's the most general worm that people see in North America here, I know, and like that's the worm that Charles Darwin, when he talks about like his experiments and watching worms pull leaves into their dens, it's that type of worm. So they make permanent burrows that are vertical, and they travel vertically throughout the soil. So they're going to be pulling organic matter down into their burrows, and they're also going to be bringing soil up to other horizons in the soil from down deep. So they're going to be helping to transfer minerals and things like that throughout the soil. Then we have endogeic worms, which burrow horizontally in the upper layers. If you look on the right-hand side here, you can see the different soil layers. So endogeic worms are going to mainly exist in that top soil layer, and a bit in the subsoil layer. They are smaller in size. They eat soil, strictly soil, and their burrows are more temporary. So as they move vertically throughout the soil profile, they're chewing and pooping and chewing and pooping. So they're usually filling up their burrows behind them as they poop. So that's why they just have temporary burrows. So they're helping to break down soil and make nutrients available to plants and things like that, and help to form more soil structure. And then we come to epigeic worms. So these are going to be the composting worms. They're going to burrow above the soil surface. And that's the most important thing that we're going to learn in this whole presentation today, is that these worms aren't really living within the topsoil. They're going to be living, if you look on that soil layers illustration off to the right-hand side there, the top O horizon or organic layer, they're going to live in that. In like a field situation, if you've ever gone out to a cow field and flipped over a cow patty, you're going to find red wigglers in there. Those are going to be composting worms. They're going to be living in that very top layer of the organic layer, not necessarily in the soil. So that's why you're going to find more that are moving into cow patties, because they want to break down that the organic matter in there. And in a forest type situation, they're going to be much more thriving, because you're going to have a lot more organic matter from all that leaf litter that's in a forest system. So they burrow above the soil surface in the plant litter layer, and they eat decaying organic matter like leaves, manure, debris. They're not eating soil like other worms. So they need, I'm going to stress that, they need organic matter, and you'll hear me say that again in the presentation here. All right, so epigeic worms. Typically smaller than most other worms that you're going to see within the soil. They range in size from 1 to 7 centimeters in length. What's great about them, which is one of the reasons why we also use them for composting, is that they're adapted to a fluctuating range of temperatures and moisture levels. So since they live in that range above the soil layer, the soil is going to be insulated. As you go deeper, it's going to be much more insulated. So worms that are at the surface layer or above are going to experience a much more greater range and fluctuation of temperatures and moisture. So they also need high amounts of organic matter, which is not going to be found within soil. You're going to have some organic matter in soils, but most soils are maybe between 2 and 5% organic matter if it's a decent soil. And then the common worms used for vermicomposting are going to be, this isn't any specific order, red wigglers, red tigers, European night crawlers, blue worms, and African night crawlers. And I would say by popularity of what people use, it would probably go red wigglers, African night crawlers, and then European night crawlers. And red tigers or blue worms are usually kind of mixed in sometimes with red wigglers when people purchase red wigglers. So what makes them good composters? We basically already touched on different reasons why they're good composters. They were basically born to break things down. So in nature, in natural systems, they work as decomposers. So they're going through above that, in that organic layer of the soil, they're eating organic matter and living at that soil surface. And like I said, they're adapted to a range of temperatures and moisture levels, which makes them ideal for the fluctuating moisture levels and temperatures in worm bins. And then when they're eating organic matter and chewing through organic matter in a bin or on the soil surface, they're actually feeding on microorganisms. So they're getting their nutrients from microorganisms, and they're also, as they're chewing that organic matter down to get to the microorganisms, they're facilitating that breakdown of organic matter into humus, and also helping with mineralization and nutrient cycling to make these nutrients within the organic matter available to plants. So with them, you also get an increase in microbial populations like bacteria, protozoa especially. One epigeic worms and other type of worms, but especially epigeic worms, when they eat things, their digestive system inoculates their poo as it goes out with more bacteria and protozoa. So they're eating organic matter that has certain populations, and as they eat, they have more biology within their guts, just like we do. We have a lot of bacteria and fungi within us that help us to break things down. And then their excrement gets inoculated. That's one of the reasons that makes worm castings especially good and even greater quality than like regular compost. The other thing that makes worm casting so great is that as they eat material, they're adding growth hormones and regulators, which is going to be good for future plants. But it's needed in limited amounts, and we'll discuss that in just in the next slide or the slide after that. And then, yeah, so along with other types of worms, as they're eating, they're mixing the organic matter in the O horizon. So they're homogenizing all that humus, organic matter, and soil, turning it into a nice consistent mix, just like in your worm bin. You know, you've got vermicast that's on the bottom, that's one consistency. And as you kind of move up in the horizon in your worm bin, things get chunkier and chunkier. So in your worm bin, they're also helping to homogenize that mix as well. So what makes them bad soil dwellers? Epigeic worms are unlikely to survive in soil. Before I go through all these, I know that on these different Facebook groups and things like that, you're going to have seen different buddies that say that they did it and everything worked out perfectly fine. And that may happen for a little while, but these worms are not meant to be soil dwellers, and you can do more research. Like Dr. Clive Edwards has written several books. I like to read things that he's written. He's probably done the most research that I know of. He's at Ohio State University, or has been at Ohio State University. So ask an expert and they'll tell you that epigeic worms aren't going to survive in soil. So epigeic worms consume humus and organic matter, not soil. I mentioned that before. So that's the first reason that we don't want to put them in soil. They're not going to be consuming that soil. They're not going to be getting what they need from the soil. So they're not going to really last that long in a situation where it's just strictly, soil. Soils, in that sense, soil's not going to provide much organic matter. It's mainly made up of sand, silt, clay, and other minerals with a tiny percentage of organic matter. So the worms, again, aren't getting what they need when they're in the soil. Epigeic worms. And like I said, yeah, you're going to see some epigeic worms like in a pasture system that are going to move up and eat, cow manure and things like that. But their population isn't going to be as thriving in that situation as they are in a forest system where they've got tons of leaf litter and sticks and different debris that's going to be falling and feeding them as organic matter. So some gardens may contain soil mixes that will provide organic matter for epigeic worms. So, if you fill up a raised bed garden with a soil mix that isn't necessarily topsoil, it's a bunch of broken down things that some person labeled as topsoil, but it's really a bunch of organic matter. Yeah, they'll survive in there briefly until they chew through the organic matter. It can also cause an issue. Well, I'll get into that in the next slide here. So yeah, there's products that are advertised that they incorporate worm bins into a garden so that you might bury your worm bin. I'm not going to mention any names. You'll bury this certain product into your raised bed or soil garden, and I believe that people assume that these worms are going to be in the bed and then moving out horizontally into their garden soils to help feed their plants, and then coming back and going back out and coming back and going back out. And that's not likely at all what's going to work. Those composting worms are going to be loving their little compost bin. Yeah, they're going to help provide some soil biology, which will help migrate out into the soil, but they're not going to want to go out into the soil because they don't live in the soil. That's not their habitat. They're going to want to be in a bin or in a bed that has a lot of organic matter. So yeah, maybe you're burying this in a bed that has, plenty of organic matter for them at first, but it's not going to be sustainable. So the products that are advertised, don't think that they're going to work like people say that they're going to work is all I'm trying to get across. So yeah, it's not a good idea to release epigeic worms into a garden. I think people get this idea like, oh, they do such a great job in my worm bin. You know, I've got excess ones now. I should put them out into my soil to help my carrots and tomatoes and basil plants in the garden. But that's what we've been going across over this whole time, is that they aren't meant to live in soil. So if you want worms for a garden, dig up soil dwelling worms and introduce them into your garden beds. I can't remember the book that I was reading, but it talks about like having a healthy pasture system and digging out like 1 square foot of sod. And there was plenty of earthworms in that soil. And they basically use that like as an inoculant, and they would go to a bad pasture land, dig out 1 square foot and replace that. And then within a year and 2 years, they would notice that healthy soil would spread out and radiate away from where those good worms were inoculated into the soil. So get some soil dwelling worms and stick those in your worm bin. You can dig them up, find them somewhere else, or purchase them somewhere else, but just don't use your epigeic or composting worms. And with as expensive that they are anymore, like I don't see why you would want to spend $50, $60 on a pound of worms and then just put them into your soil. So some gray areas, which I've also already mentioned a few times. Raised beds that are filled heavily with compost, you're putting plenty of organic matter in there through the compost. That's going to give the worms something to feed on, and it's not going to be like a soil situation. It's going to be just like a worm bin or a windrow of worms that are eating away at compost and organic matter. So yes, again, that's going to be a limited time where they're eating away at things in there, or a soil that's been top dressed with several inches of compost, like in a market garden system. A lot of people will put down like 4 inches of compost on top of the soil. Yes, you could introduce worms into that, and they're going to survive for so long, but eventually that's going to work its way into the soil, and your populations are going to diminish. And then this isn't necessarily soil, but a lot of people are really into Johnson Sioux, the beam bioreactor, and part of that, the instructions with that are after the composting process, you add so many composting worms into that. So yeah, they're going to survive, and you can leave them in there, but you're not going to get them back likely unless you screen that material and screen your worms out of there, which is totally possible. But again, for all of these things, it's not going to be sustainable. So I was going to mention that I had seen someone even mention from real life experience on one of the Facebook groups that they had done this. You know, they had put composting worms into their raised bed gardens. It did well for the first year, but they had put so many in there that there were so many worm castings that I mentioned. Worm castings have growth regulators in them, that at a certain point they were having issues growing plants because there were so many worm castings. So if you read different research on using worm castings, it's not good to use more than 20% of like a soil mix or something like that as worm castings. Once you get above 20%, and even closer to 50%, at 50%, if you're using say 50% worm castings and 50% peat moss or cocoa coir or something like that, you're actually getting diminished results because of these growth regulators. There are growth hormones which help plants to grow more. There are also growth regulators which slow down the growth of plants. And because of these growth regulators, at higher percentages, you start to have worse results. So you start to see bad things in your plants. So that's why another reason you wouldn't want to add a bunch of worms into a raised bed garden. You're far better off improving your soil to attract the worms. I grew up in Iowa, so I love that movie, Field of Dreams. If you build it, they will come. So attract earthworms to your bed by using compost, vermicompost, compost teas. Improve the soil biology, and give earthworms plenty of food to eat. They're going to be chewing through soil and eating microorganisms. So get good biology in your soil, and you'll attract plenty of earthworms. All right, I am going to take questions now, and I'm going to go back to my main screen so I can see any questions that have come up. Give me just 1 second to kind of flip through questions here. Thanks everybody for tuning in. I hope you're enjoying it so far. What do I recommend if you don't have any leaves to feed the worm bin? I mean, any organic matter, food scraps mixed in with some shredded cardboard or newspaper. Any replacement to leaves would be some type of carbonaceous brown material like shredded paper, or cocoa coir is good bedding for worms as well. Shoot, you know what? I apologize. I just realized that I shared my thing and I didn't show any of the things. So let's run through it real quick. Dang it, I apologize. When Steve's not here, I'm not the tech guy, he's the tech guy, and it's easier when we have someone else. So my apologies. Let's just go back to the slides real quick. I was actually hoping to have someone who could text me in case that happened, because I was afraid there was going to be an issue. Yeah, there's not many images to see. It was basically this right here were the soil layers. So if you want to take a brief look at this illustration right here, you can see the soil layers. The O horizon on the very top there is the organic layer. So that's going to be the layer above the topsoil. So again, just real briefly, the anesic worms are going to be burrowing vertically through that organic layer, the topsoil and the subsoil. Endogeic worms are going to be burrowing horizontally through that topsoil layer and some of the subsoil. And then epigeic worms are going to be living at or above the organic layer there. Happy worm. That was basically it for the illustrations. Sorry, everybody. All right, now questions. Somebody said, can you put them in a barrel compost? Yes, you could put them in a barrel compost, but again, like you would want to treat it kind of like an urban worm bag where you're slowly building up levels. You wouldn't want to dump a bunch of material in, at least with red wigglers. African night crawlers can consume things a lot quicker. So with African night crawlers, a lot of people use the process of just dumping like one whole bucket of food for the worms together in one thing, and then adding the worms and then letting them chew through it for however long. With red wigglers, they process things a little bit slower, so it's good to add things in layers that are like an inch or inch and a half thick, and then wait for them to chew through that, and then add some more stuff. There was one other question. Most people were commenting how they couldn't see the pictures. Again, my apologies. I am so sorry that I was going through that. You guys were just watching me talk and read things. So somebody said, so they'll just die, not harm the soil. Yes, they won't. It's not like they're going to harm the soil. It's just that, just like in a worm bin, people talk about how worms are able to regulate their own populations in a worm bin. So if you stop feeding your worm bin for so long, your worms are slowly going to decrease in population. In that same sense, once you introduce them into the soil, they're not going to get to as much organic matter, so their populations are just going to slowly diminish as they don't have food, the necessary foods. Right, yeah, somebody else mentioned it's not just organic content. The moisture levels in soil drop well below. So yeah, that's a good point, which I had not mentioned, is that soils aren't necessarily providing the moisture levels that they need, that composting worms need. Just flipping through the questions here. Sorry, it's hard as one person to read through these and answer at the same time. who is selling worms these days? We always, you can go on our website to get Mimi's worms, or go to mimisworms.com. She will pay attention to the temperatures, and I don't believe she ships on, like if she sees extremely hot days coming up, she will not ship, I believe, but she's also an expert on how to package them and sending them so that they survive the trip. So I would check her out. Let's see here. Are rice hulls good addition to bedding? Yeah, rice hulls can be a good addition to bedding. They take a little bit longer to break down, but they're going to help add some porosity, and they're going to be like a slow release thing. What are some good amendments to make premium worm castings? A variety of organic matter is going to give you a variety of nutrients and things. You can also maybe add a little kelp meal in there to help add macro and micronutrients and minerals. Can they eat fish bone meal? Yeah, you would want to sprinkle it in there lightly. Any type of bone meal is going to help to also add phosphorus, so you would want to keep it to a minimum for that reason also. Anyway, yeah, it looks like that's it for the questions. I don't see any other questions coming up. I hope you enjoyed the talk today. Again, my apologies for not getting that screen shared. I hope you all learned just as well. If you want to go, you can always go back and watch it again. It wasn't that long of a presentation there, so you can check it out. And you know what? When I get done here, I might just run through the slides again for anybody who wants to watch this. I can just not really talk and put the slides up for a few seconds each for anybody who wants to see all those details and maybe take a few notes. But thanks for joining in today. We'll see you next Wednesday. I've got a few topics in mind, maybe PFAS or persistent herbicides next week. So yeah, join us next week, Wednesday at 11 Eastern, or whatever time it is at your home there. And again, thanks for joining in. Have a good day. And I'm going to share this quickly. Here we've got your 3 types of ecological groups along with the soil layers. And those are pronounced anesic, endogeic, and epigeic. And then here are the details about epigeic worms. Here's why they're good composters. Quick mention for anybody who hasn't checked it out, you can find a PDF version of the soil biology primer. Just Google soil biology primer PDF, and you can maybe even add USDA on there. There's a few different PDF versions you can find online. It's a great introduction to a soil food web, and it also goes into earthworms. And actually, you can see Clive Edwards, who I mentioned, is the one who wrote the chapter on earthworms for that. And he actually mentions in there this right here, that epigeic worms are unlikely to survive in soil. But it talks about the different types of worms there, but also gives a great breakdown of bacteria, fungi, protozoa, nematodes. It's worms, and I can't remember, there's one more chapter. Yeah, so here are the details on why they're bad for soil for anybody wanting to take notes. And then just those few gray areas. I just realized I didn't share the screen again. Thanks, everybody.